Tonight's story is about a man who spent 5 years watching his wife try to earn a place in his daughter's life. She cooked her meals, remembered her preferences, showed up for her consistently even when that same daughter barely acknowledged she existed. And then, at their second wedding anniversary party, surrounded by every friend and family member they had, his daughter stood up, grabbed a glass, and spent 5 minutes explaining to the entire room why his wife was an obvious downgrade from her dead mother. He didn't blow up. He didn't beg his daughter to take it back. What happened next quietly unraveled everything his daughter thought she had coming. Buckle in. My daughter called my wife an obvious downgrade from her dead mother at our anniversary party. My wife pulled her college funding the next day, and my daughter has blocked me on everything since. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a few weeks, and I figured I might as well put it somewhere because I keep replaying it, and I need to work through it out loud. Or I guess in text. Whatever. Here goes. My name's Kyle. I'm 42. I run a small tile and flooring installation business. Residential, some light commercial. It's been my thing for about 8 years. Not glamorous, but I'm good at it, and it pays. For the past year and a half or so, though, things have been on the tighter side. Not failing, just tight enough that cash flow was something I had to actually think about, and I'd been pushing a few bigger expenses down the road. I've been with my wife Nina for almost 5 years total. We dated for 3, got married 2 years ago. She's 39, works as an office manager for a dental group in town. Steady, organized, the kind of person who remembers something you mentioned once 6 months ago and just quietly takes care of it without making a big production out of it. She's the most competent person I've ever been with, and I mean that in the best possible way. I also have a daughter, Brooke. She's 18 now, was getting ready to start college in the fall. Her mom and I divorced when Brooke was 10. It wasn't some dramatic blow-up. We just grew apart in the way that two people who get together too young sometimes do. No infidelity, no big ugliness, just a slow realization that we'd become polite roommates, and both of us knew it. We split on okay terms, co-parented without too much friction. Brooke took it hard, but kids do, and she was adjusting. She still had both of us. She'd spend most of the week with her mom and the rest with me. The routine held together. Then, 8 months after Nina and I started dating, Brooke's mom passed away. Aneurysm in her sleep. No warning, no lead-up, nothing. She went to bed fine and didn't wake up. Brooke was 15. That changed everything. All the processing Brooke had done around the divorce got buried under grief basically overnight. And I can't know this for certain. But I think in her mind, the divorce became something different after that. More final, more unfair. Before, her mom was still there, still a presence. The split was painful, but it wasn't permanent in that direction. After the funeral, it was permanent in every direction at once. She didn't have a mom to go back to on weekends anymore. That safe space was gone. She moved in with me full-time, and on weekends, she'd visit her maternal grandparents to get some of that connection back. Nina knew all of this going in. She never tried to position herself as a replacement for Brooke's mom. She was careful about it, actually, self-aware enough to understand that moving too fast would backfire and that Brooke needed to set the pace herself. So she just showed up and tried. She learned Brooke's food preferences and made her favorite meals without announcing it as a gesture. She remembered things Brooke had mentioned once in passing, a show she liked, a store she'd been meaning to check out, and would bring them up later in ways that felt natural instead of forced. Whenever I'd come home later than expected, she and Brooke would have been in the house alone together for an hour or two, and Nina would always try. She'd ask about Brooke's day and actually sit with the answer instead of just waiting to talk. I remember one specific thing that stuck with me. About a year into Nina and I dating, Brooke had mentioned offhand that she'd loved this particular soup her grandmother used to make. Just a passing comment. 3 weeks later, Nina made it from scratch, completely unprompted, had looked up the regional recipe and everything. Brooke said thanks and went back to her phone. That was it. Nina just nodded and cleaned up the kitchen. That was the dynamic for 5 years. Brooke was never openly rude. She didn't blow up at Nina or say anything cruel to her face. Not then. She was just closed. Kept Nina at arm's length, answered questions with short responses, avoided one-on-one time when she could. When Nina brought her coffee in the morning, Brooke would say thanks and immediately go back to her phone. She made it clear, Not aggressively, but consistently clearly. That there was a ceiling on how close they were ever going to be, and she wasn't raising it for anybody. I told myself this was grief. I told myself Brooke needed time and space, and that if I just let things develop naturally, something would eventually click. I didn't step in. Didn't push Brooke to be warmer. Never told her directly that Nina deserved more than the minimum of civil. I just kept waiting for something to naturally fix itself. And I kept choosing that over and over again without calling it what it was. The honest thing is that I didn't want to deal with the fallout. Every time I imagined having the actual conversation with Brooke, the one where I tell her that her behavior toward Nina isn't acceptable and needs to change, I could already picture how it would go. She'd shut down. She'd feel like I was choosing Nina over her. She'd pull back from me, and I'd lose ground I'd been slowly rebuilding since her mom passed. So I kept postponing it. Kept telling myself the timing wasn't right, that she was too fragile, that one more month and she'd start coming around on her own. One more month turned into 5 years. That's a long time to keep making the same non-decision and pretending it doesn't count. 5 years of that. 5 years of Nina trying, and me quietly letting it not work. Anyway, Nina and I decided to celebrate our second anniversary with a dinner party at our house. Close family, a few good friends, maybe 22 people total. Nothing over the top. Nina handled most of the planning, which meant everything was actually organized and on time, which wouldn't have happened if I'd been running it. Good food, people were relaxed, genuinely warm energy all evening. I was happy. It was the kind of night where you look around the room and feel like things are actually okay. A few days before the party, I'd noticed that Brooke seemed almost upbeat, more communicative than usual at the dinner table, asking Nina a few actual questions about the party setup. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I didn't read into it too much. She'd had flickers of warmth before that never really led anywhere, but it registered. Looking back, I think I was seeing what I wanted to see. Brooke was there the night of the party. She'd come back from a gap year program abroad a few months earlier and was home for the summer before college started in the fall. There was one thing I should explain up front, because it becomes important later. About 2 months before the party, I'd had a conversation with Nina about Brooke's first year of college tuition. My business had been going through a slow stretch, not failing, but tight enough that covering a full year of college right now would have put real pressure on things. I told Nina what was going on, asked if she could cover the tuition for year one while I got the business back on track, told her I'd pay her back once the cash flow normalized. She agreed without hesitation. No conditions, no negotiation. She'd also offered to co-sign on a student loan if that ended up being the cleaner route. The point being, Nina was Brooke's ticket to college this year, and Brooke had no idea. I hadn't told Brooke yet. I kept meaning to, kept putting it off because it felt like a weird conversation to initiate. Hey, I need you to know that my wife is being generous to you. And I figured I'd get to it. That was another call I made wrong. About halfway through the anniversary party, Brooke stood up and said she wanted to make a toast. I felt this cautious optimism when she said it, because she'd never done anything like that before. Never gone out of her way to publicly acknowledge Nina or our relationship. I thought, okay, maybe this is finally it. Maybe she's grown up enough to get there. Nina caught my eye from across the table, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing. I let myself believe for about 30 seconds that something good was coming. Brooke started well, congratulated us both, said it was good to see we'd made it work, talked about how relationships take real effort and not everyone sticks with it. Then she said how surprised she was that her dad, meaning me, had been willing to keep trying through disagreements and rough patches. Still okay. A little backhanded, but I let it go. Then it turned. She started talking about her parents' marriage. Specifically about how her mom and I used to argue when she was a kid, and how she'd always believed that if I'd actually tried, I could have saved that marriage. That I never gave her mom the same level of effort I apparently give Nina. I could feel the room shifting. My dad put his fork down. Nina's mom stopped mid-sip. I tried to catch Brooke's eye to signal her to stop. She wasn't looking at me. She went on. Said she didn't understand how I chose to marry Nina after her mom, because by her assessment, and she said this out loud, to a room full of people who knew all of us, Nina was an obvious downgrade. Not just in appearance, in intelligence too. She couldn't figure out what I saw in her. And then she turned and addressed Nina directly and told her she should count herself lucky her mom wasn't around anymore, because if she were, Nina wouldn't have stood a chance. Then she set her glass down and walked upstairs to her room. The table went completely quiet. Nina wasn't crying. She was just still, that particular kind of still, where someone's so blindsided that the body hasn't caught up yet. I went to her immediately, grabbed her hand, told her quietly this wasn't okay, and I was going to handle it. She nodded once and said nothing. People started finding polite ways to leave. Quick goodbyes, thanks for having us, the whole hurried exit. I don't blame any of them. Nobody knew what to do with themselves, and I wouldn't have either. I stayed close to Nina for the rest of the evening as people filtered out. She was quiet the entire time, not processing out loud, not asking me what I was going to do, just sitting with it. She helped clear a few plates off the table like it was a normal end to a normal night. I kept watching her for a sign of what she needed, and she wasn't giving me anything to read. After the last guest left, she said she was going to bed, and she said it the way you say it when what you actually mean is that you've reached the limit of what you can handle in one night, and you need everything to stop. I sat in the kitchen alone for probably an hour. Didn't turn on the TV, didn't look at my phone, just sat there. I kept replaying the toast, every sentence of it. The way Brooke's voice had been totally steady the whole time, like she'd rehearsed it. The part where she turned and addressed Nina directly at the end. The specific word downgrade and how flat it landed. I went upstairs and told Brooke she was leaving for her grandparents' house first thing in the morning. She pushed back more than I expected. She said she wanted to stay and confront Nina the next day, which I still can't fully process because she was the one who'd done something wrong here. I told her that wasn't happening. I made the calls that night while she slept, packed a bag for her, and had her gone before Nina was up. Nina never got a chance to say anything to her face. I'm not sure if that was the right call or not, but I didn't want more damage done before anyone had cooled off. Hold on, for the listeners, this is me jumping in, not Kyle. Because I need you to catch what just happened here. 5 years. 5 years of someone cooking her food, learning her preferences, showing up without applause or acknowledgement. And what does she get for it? A prepared speech at the woman's own anniversary party. Nobody improvises the phrase obvious downgrade in front of 22 people. You don't freestyle a 2-adjective critique at a family dinner. That had a first draft. She's basically the Taylor Swift of passive aggression, except Taylor Swift is actually talented, and this was straight to streaming with 0 reviews. Enter Princess Farewell Tour. Back to Kyle. The next couple of days between me and Nina were rough in that quiet, strained way that's almost harder than a screaming fight. She wasn't demanding anything from me, wasn't asking me to cut off my daughter, wasn't giving ultimatums, wasn't doing any of the things I might have braced for. She was just sitting with it, working through what had happened in her own way, privately, which is how Nina handles things. And I was trying to figure out what I could possibly say that wouldn't land as hollow. I went to work both days and got basically nothing done. Kept going over the same calculation in my head. Was this fixable? Did I want it to be fixable in the way that would actually fix it? Which was Brooke genuinely understanding what she'd done and meaning it when she apologized? Or was I just hoping the tension would dissipate on its own, like I'd been hoping things would naturally resolve for 5 years? I kept running into the same answer and not loving it. I kept checking in on Nina. She'd say she was okay, and I could tell she meant it in the sense that she wasn't falling apart. But something had shifted in how she was carrying herself. More contained. Like she was recalibrating something internally and didn't want to talk through the process out loud. 3 days after the party, I told her about the college arrangement, what I'd set up with Nina to cover Brooke's tuition, how Brooke hadn't known about it. Nina listened to all of it. Then she told me she wasn't doing it anymore. Quietly, just a statement. No blow-up, no, so either your daughter apologizes or I'm gone. Just a clean, clear line. I couldn't argue with her. I'd watched Nina try for 5 years. I'd watched her get shut out over and over and come back anyway, unprompted, without asking me to intervene. And the expectation was that after standing up at our anniversary party and calling her a downgrade from a woman who was no longer alive, Nina was supposed to reset to 0 and hand over tuition money? No, I wouldn't have asked that of her. I didn't. I told Brooke about it a few days after the party. She was upset, and some of it was legitimate. I should have told her earlier that finances were complicated, that Nina was the current plan. That was my fault entirely, and I own it. But most of what Brooke said was built around the assumption that an apology would be enough to reset everything, and she'd still get what she was expecting out of it. That's not how any of this works. The apology came about 2 days after the party. I read it carefully. I knew what it was immediately. It wasn't, I said something genuinely awful, and I'm ashamed of myself. It was, I understand there are financial consequences, and I'd like to limit them. She'd sent it after her grandfather laid out what was at stake. That was when the apology appeared. Not before then. Nina read it, went quiet for a while, then told me she was done. Not with me. Done with the whole project of trying to get Brooke to accept her. She said she'd been giving it everything for 5 years, and she was finished. She wasn't asking me to choose sides. Just done with that part of it. And she said it without any drama, which somehow made it heavier than if she'd cried. I told her she was right. Pause. This is me, not Kyle. I want to break down that apology for a second because everybody needs to be able to recognize this pattern on sight. Genuine remorse shows up unprompted and costs the person something. Damage control remorse shows up the moment someone explains what's financially at stake and costs absolutely nothing. Princess Farewell Tour skipped straight to option 2, which is extra rich considering her entire speech was about how her dad never tried hard enough. She literally built her argument on the concept of effort, and then put in 0 effort until money was mentioned. Back to Kyle. Nina and I had a real fight about a week after the party. Not about whether she was wrong to pull the funding, she wasn't and I knew it, but about where I actually stood. Not the version I'd been saying, the real one. I didn't have a clean answer at first, and she could tell. She pushed on it. She said she'd never truly felt backed up by me when it came to Brooke, and that for years she'd told herself it was because I was protecting my relationship with my daughter. But now she was wondering if it was simpler than that, if I'd just been okay with her being treated that way as long as it kept things quiet. She went further. She said she'd spent 5 years trying to build something with Brooke, and every time she hit a wall, she'd checked in with herself. Am I pushing too hard? Am I being too present? Is there something I'm doing that's making this worse? She'd spent years adjusting and recalibrating and trying different approaches, all while I nodded along and told her, she'll come around. And at no point had I turned around and told Brooke the same thing. Not once. It was always Nina who had to adjust. Never Brooke who had to meet anyone halfway. That landed. I didn't get defensive because she wasn't wrong. Inaction is still a choice. I'd been making it over and over while telling myself I wasn't really choosing anything. Every time I didn't step in, every time I let another cold interaction pass without saying something to Brooke about it, I was choosing something. I'd just been comfortable not naming it. We didn't fully resolve the fight that night. We sat on opposite ends of the couch in this quiet that wasn't angry anymore. The kind that comes after the honest thing has been said out loud, and now both people have to figure out what to do with it. I told her I was sorry, specifically, not generically. Not sorry about how things turned out. Sorry for every specific time I didn't say what I should have said to Brooke. She acknowledged it, didn't brush it off or dismiss it. She just nodded and said she needed to hear that. Then she told me she was going to stay at her parents' house for a while. Not leaving, just needing some distance from the situation. Her parents had been at the party. They'd seen everything, and she wanted to be around people who already understood without her having to re-explain it from scratch. I told her I got it. I helped her carry her bag to the car and watched her pull out of the driveway. I went inside after she left and stress ate half a bag of pretzels, standing at the kitchen counter at 11 p.m. Genuinely the least relevant detail I've included, but also the most honest. My co-worker had been leaving granola bars on my desk all week like a worried forest animal. I'd been ignoring them. I should have eaten the granola bars. The days she was gone were strange. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a while. Not a bad quiet, just the kind that makes you think too much. I spent the first couple of days catching up on work stuff I'd been ignoring, and somewhere around day 3 I wrote out a long list of every moment over the past 5 years where I should have said something to Brooke and didn't. I didn't do anything with the list. I just needed to see it in front of me. It was longer than I expected. Yo, time out. Let me jump in here, because I want to call out something that most men completely blow in this exact moment. She's packing a bag. Everything in a guy's brain is screaming to do something, say something, manufacture a crisis to stop her from getting in the car. And Kyle helps carry the bag. That's it. No guilt trip, no dramatic last speech, no fine, then maybe you shouldn't come back. Just, I understand, and a hand on the doorframe. That's the unsexy, actual version of not making it worse. She came back. Keep that in mind. Back to the story. Nina was at her parents' house for about a week and a half. We talked on the phone every day, sometimes for a long time, sometimes just a few minutes to check in. About 10 days in, I drove over for dinner. It was a Wednesday. Awkward for the first 20 minutes because her parents had been at the party and weren't sure how to act around me, which I completely understood. Her mom made pasta, we all sat down, and by the time we were halfway through the meal, it was just people talking. Nobody brought up the party directly. It was fine. Better than fine, actually. A few days after that, Nina showed up at the house in the morning before I'd left for work. Just knocked and let herself in with her key. I was standing in the kitchen with my bag on my shoulder about to head out. I called in and took the day off. We spent it just being around each other. Nothing planned, nothing to resolve, just existing in the same space without it being tense. First day like that in almost 3 weeks. We made breakfast, walked around the block, watched part of a movie neither of us could get into. That afternoon, she said something I've been thinking about since. She said she wasn't angry at Brooke. She was finished. She wanted me to understand the difference. Not bitterness, not a grudge, just done. Like closing a tab you'd had open too long. She wasn't walking around carrying it. She just quietly decided she was done extending energy in that direction, and she needed me to know it wasn't a threat or an ultimatum. It was just where she'd landed. I told her I understood. And this time, I actually meant it the way she needed me to mean it. We sat on the back porch for a while that afternoon, just not talking, which sounds weird, but was actually the most comfortable either of us had been in weeks. At some point, she fell asleep in the patio chair for like 20 minutes. I let her sleep. Then I told her what had been happening with Brooke, because I'd been keeping most of it from her while she was at her parents'. She hadn't asked, which was its own kind of grace. After Brooke had gone to her grandparents', I'd kept trying to stay in contact. Texts, calls, a few voicemails. She was responding at first, upset, still making her case, still expecting the outcome to be different. Then the responses got shorter. Then nothing. I drove out to her grandparents' place once, knocked on the door. Her grandfather answered, told me politely but clearly that Brooke wasn't ready to see me. She didn't come downstairs. He did pass along one thing. Her maternal grandparents would cover her college costs. They expected me to pay them back when I was in a position to. I told him that was fair, and I'd hold myself to it. And I meant every word of that. I was relieved Brooke wasn't going to be left without options. But standing on that porch being told all of this through her grandfather, instead of by her directly, was its own particular kind of hard to sit with. I tried calling from a different number a couple of times after that. Definitely not something I'm proud of. She didn't pick up. She called me once, about 2.5 weeks after the party. I picked up on the first ring. She talked for most of the call. Said I'd never prioritized her. That I'd always put Nina first. That my willingness to keep working on my marriage was proof that I'd never really tried with her mom, and that was why that marriage failed. I wanted to respond to all of it. I had a lot to say, but she didn't want a conversation. She wanted to deliver what she'd been building and then be done. She told me she was finished. Done talking to me, done with all of it. Then she hung up and blocked me everywhere. That was the last time we spoke. Okay, hold on. Let me break this down one final time. His daughter played every card she had. The guilt trip, the financial angle, the rewrite the divorce history angle, and the nuclear option. She lost every single one. And her response to going 0 for 4 was to reframe herself as the tragic hero of a story where the villain is her own father for not letting his wife get steamrolled indefinitely. This is some full Breaking Bad logic. She made every bad call, watched it blow up, and decided the problem was everyone else's moral framework. Walter White at least had a chemistry degree. Anyway, Kyle's wrapping up. Final update. It's been about 6 weeks since that last phone call. Here's where things actually stand. Nina and I are good. Genuinely good. Going through something that rough together, The kind of thing that could have ended it if either one of us had folded at the wrong moment, and coming out on the same side does something to the foundation that you can't get any other way. There's less uncertainty now. We know where we stand in a way that 5 years of smooth sailing alone doesn't produce. The business is picking back up. A couple of bigger contracts came in over the last month, and if things hold like they're trending, I should be able to start paying Brooke's grandparents back before the end of the year. I fully intend to. That debt doesn't sit right with me. As for Brooke, I'm still blocked on everything. Her grandparents have passed along a few updates through a mutual family contact. She's settled in at school, doing okay from what they can tell. I'm glad for that. I'm not sitting around hoping she's struggling somewhere. I'm not building a case against her in my head. She's my daughter, and I love her. She made a choice to go no contact, and I'm not going to chase a closed door. Here's the part I've had to actually sit with. I don't fully blame Brooke for who she became in this. She lost her mom at 15, out of nowhere, with no warning. That's a wound that doesn't have a clean timeline on it. Some of her coldness toward Nina over the years, some of the resentment, that was real grief. Not just entitlement. I let that belief keep me passive for way too long. I should have had hard conversations with her years ago. Should have made it clear that Nina wasn't a target for that pain. I didn't do that. That's on me. I've also had to sit with the version of events where I imagine telling 15-year-old Brooke, fresh off losing her mom, that she needs to treat her dad's new girlfriend better. And I understand why I didn't do it then. But 15 eventually became 16, then 17, then 18. At some point, the grief excuse stopped covering the whole behavior. I kept applying it anyway because it was easier than the alternative. But the speech at the party wasn't grief spilling over in an uncontrolled moment. She looked directly at Nina when she delivered it. She chose every word, and expecting my wife to absorb all of that and still cover college costs like nothing happened. That expectation revealed something about what Brooke thought she was owed from the people around her, regardless of how she treated them. Like certain people were just obligated to keep showing up for her no matter what. I'm not bitter about it. I'm just clear-eyed in a way I maybe wasn't before all of this. There's something clarifying about going through a situation where you can't be neutral anymore, where every choice you make is visible and counts. I'd been operating in the fog of, maybe it'll work out for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just make a call and own it. The door on my end is still open if she ever decides to walk through it. That's not going to change. I'm her dad, and that doesn't have an off switch. But I'm not standing in the hallway waiting either. Nina's here. We're fine. And the thing I kept half protecting for 5 years without fully committing to it, I committed to it when it actually counted. Better late, I guess. What would you have done in my position? Look, Kyle's not winning Father of the Year for how long he let things drift. He said so himself. But when the moment counted, he didn't fold. Didn't throw his wife under the bus to keep the peace. Didn't chase a closed door. A lot of guys in that spot would have caved immediately. He didn't. Is it a painful outcome? Obviously. But he's still standing, still married, and not apologizing for how it landed. Drop your thoughts below. Did he handle this right? Or is this one he'll regret? Subscribe if you're not already. We post every single day.